All right, everybody, welcome back to another video tutorial. What we'll continue with today is basically talking about editing techniques. In the last video, we talked about setting up a session, setting up a good workflow, so that way we have a nice clean space and an efficient process to go through. All right, so if you remember, we synchronized the tempo of this track here. 105 worked for me when I was doing the tap tempo feature. All right, we put some markers in, just hitting the little marker button and positioning our playback head in the whatever area you want to make the marker. All right, and then finally, remember we sync things to grid mode, and this way, whenever we're making edits and cuts, everything is going to be in relation to some grid. All right, so the first thing I want you all to do is take the time, go through each track, and identify all the different sounds and errors. What you're trying to do is clean up this audio so when you go to the mixing stage, you really have a tight performance that's synchronized both with tempo and with any other kind of sonic property. You're trying to fix imbalances in frequency, get rid of extraneous noises. So that's what we'll do here. Let's preview a couple of these tracks here. So let's see. How about we hop over to this read track? I don't know if you guys could hear that, but there's a very faint recording of the overall track in the background here. It's very soft. So, you want to take the time to identify what audio you don't need. For instance, I would use our trim tool to try and trim up all the way to wherever the downbeat is, all right? Or wherever the entrance of the actual instrument sound is. And you can go in between these different spots here and manually cut out all of this empty space. Of course, listen. You have to listen to each track so you're not cutting out important information. Something else you can always do is go up to the top of your Pro Tools window. Let me full screen this. And you can increase the wave, file view. So let me click here. Look at how much information is in between the tracks. Now, I'm hesitant about overemphasizing this feature because you should always edit with your ears first, eyes second. But again, look at how much is in between these individual tracks. So let me play this read track again and we'll just take a listen. So I'm going to solo. So it's really subtle. It's almost hard to hear. But in this case, we can highlight and just hit the delete button, right, to get rid of all those tracks. Other things you can do too in terms of helping your cutting productivity is position the playhead marker wherever you want in the track. All right. I like to highlight the track just to emphasize I'm doing the right thing. And then hit Command E. And Command E will let you split the track right there. And then you can also, use the trim tool again. Make sure you have your smart tools enabled so that way you have all the functionality, right? If I don't have smart tools enabled, I can't switch between the different functions of like hand grab, separate clip, etc., etc. So I want to make sure I have all these selected so that way I can easily go between all the tools I need. All right, so again, what you want to do is go through all of these tracks and get rid of the audio you don't want, because there's so much extra that's recorded on the track. All right, you can just see here, look at this clarinet part. I'll play it for a second. I know that's hard to hear, and I don't want to turn it up right now, but look at how much audio data is in this project file, and you can't even hear it. All the little noises, they all add up to eventually take away from the overall quality of your sound. So just going through, trimming out the parts you don't need. All right, so that's step number one. When you're done, make sure you reduce the waveforms so you have a more accurate and realistic perception of what's going on. You don't want the audio files getting clipped off on the end here. It doesn't actually change the quality or the loudness, it just zooms in more. So it's really just about your eyes and perception. All right, so that's the manual method of going through each track and identifying errors to cut out. Again, the emphasis is on getting rid of the little clicks, the pops, the hums, the in-between moments, so it's not coming into your track. All right? So one other thing that you'll want to be very careful about is how to treat breath sounds. Now, typically for vocals, I like to leave breath sounds in because it sounds natural. Singers, they usually have to breathe in to take a breath. Instrumental players, especially wind players, also have to do that too. But in a massive recording like this, I usually don't like to leave those sounds in because it's just adding up to the overall sound count here. So for any of these instrumental parts, I would just choose to cut out those breaths. All right, so let's go to the flute sound because I noticed that was particularly breathy. All right, so I'll solo this, and that way we can go back and forth and identify some of these breaths. Right, did you hear that short little breath there? Let's zoom in here. We can even raise the waveform a little bit. So let's see this little, right. And very simply, I can always just highlight and hit the delete button, right? And I cut out exactly what I don't need. And I, again, would do this for all these instrumental parts, especially in a dense, heavy track like this. I would leave the vocalist in because that's a natural sound. But, there's different philosophies about whether to cut out breaths or whether to keep them in. The number one tip I'll give you all is please make sure to be consistent. If you're gonna keep the breaths in, keep them all in. If you're gonna cut them out, cut them all out, because it's very awkward if you end up leaving some in and some out. All right, let's check out this bass clarinet, for instance. Let's see what's going on in this area. So this is like a finger noise from the bass clarinet. All right, so I would just delete that too, do a little trim. And be careful, you don't want to end up trimming out important information. So, I'd trim to about here. And one thing that I like to do anytime I make a cut, especially to smooth out a sound, is add a little fade in. because this will help cover up any additional noises, clicks and pops, and just give the sound a natural curve and lead in. And then whenever I make a cut, let's see where I made, oh, haha, here. So let's go back to this read track. I'll zoom in, boom, boom, boom. And by the way, for zoom in, you can always hit the command or window button, no, control button for PC, and hit the brackets, and that'll zoom you in without having to click down to the minus and plus buttons here. All right, so let me trim up this area right here. All right, so I'll trim up the beginning. I'll trim up the end, and be careful here because you don't want to end up cutting out important information. So let's take a listen. Oop, turned out that that's not even a recorded sound. So editing can be pretty meticulous. Let's go here. So I'll do Command E. Alrighty. And then, quite honestly, if I was editing very precisely, I would cut in between all these phrases. Take a listen first, of course, because if there's reverb, natural reverb, room reverb, and ambience, you may want to keep that. You have to make these decisions because you don't want to cut so much that it sounds unnatural. In a lot of cases, it's best to edit by phrases instead of doing micro precise edits and cuts, because then it makes the music choppy. So I like to usually edit with larger chunks of audio, larger clips and phrases. It's just a more musical way of editing. So let me move that out of the way, and we'll listen to this clip here. Yeah, so I'll leave this here. I'll zoom in or trim in a little bit, add a fade to smooth us out as we lead into this. So let's take a listen. Now, this fade here, you got to be a little careful because this reed instrument has a sharp attack. So I would zoom in even further and just try and trim closer. And notice as I trim, it aligns to the actual grid. So if you want to get a even more precise trim to a certain point, you can go back into slip mode here, so that way you have a little bit more preciseness, right? And then to reduce any room noise that may exist, I'll add a little tiny fade. Remember, to add fades, just go to the top left or the top right of the audio and slip that in. So I'm going to hop back over to grid mode, and I'm going to go to the end of this track. The end of this area. Let's find where these phrases end. Okay. Boom. All right. So let's solo this. Just a little boop. All right, so I'll zoom in here. Again, if I want to get even more precise, I can slip into slip mode and really get to the end here. And then I'll add a nice little fade. And I could always add the fade in slip mode so it's not as rigid. All right, so let's take a listen to this phrase that we cleaned up a little bit. All right, so it's really meticulous, but all these small micro edits go a long way to making the whole track very clean and ready for mixing. All right. One thing, if you are splicing tracks together, I would always make sure to do a little crossfade. For instance, let's imagine that we had two different bass clarinet parts that we were trying to put together. As soon as you make a cut, go to the bottom area of that cut, and you'll get the crossfade option. So I just put this here to smooth out between the two different cuts. When you're making cuts, you're just trying to avoid clicks and pops and mismatches of audio volume and gain. So let's double click on where I just added this crossfade. And if you do that, you can actually change the shape and the contour of the fade itself. So if you want a little bit more of the original, of the secondary track, or if you want more of the original, you can change this balance. And there's a bunch of different tools to go forth with that. Same for fades too. You can customize them to get a more natural or just a better contour that fits your audio. Let me find where my fade is. Where's that phrase? Aha, there we go. Boom, boom, boom. Gotta zoom in a lot. And here we go, double click. Oh, can I not? Oh, so notice that I'm clicking on the little line here and I'm changing the shape of the fade. All right, so that's definitely getting into the nitty gritty, but those little decisions make a big difference. So what we've been doing so far is manually editing our audio parts and cutting out these noises and extraneous sounds, again, manually. What we could also do is use a plugin if we want. So this brings us to the concept of noise gating. So if we go to our plugin area, our inserts, go to dynamics, and then, where is it? Expander and gate. So click on expander and gate here. And essentially what a gate does is it works similarly to our compressions, our limiters, and it basically has you set a threshold and it says audio cannot pass through and be heard unless it exceeds a certain threshold. All right. Essentially, we're saying that if the signal is lower than this specified amount, aka the threshold, we do not want to hear it. So that helps us automatically get rid of noises, clicks, pops, hums, because realistically, all of those sounds should exist under a certain threshold and they'll be cut out. All right. So let's see. What did I put this on? The flute track. So let's see if if we can see the gate go to work. What you'll see is that right now the gate is closed because the audio hasn't exceeded the threshold we set. When the audio exceeds the threshold, the gate will open to let the sound through. So let's check this out. Okay, solo. So this track is this plugin is automatically, just like a compressor, it's automatically reducing all the small sounds and clicks and pops. I'll play this little audio noise or artifact here. So we can take a listen. Okay, couldn't really hear that, but already. Anywho, the gate essentially oh, maybe it's because the gate was on. Oops. Haha. Let's do that now. All right, so with the gate bypass, we can see that that audio is this breathy kind of sound that the instrumentalist has included in the audio. So the gate does get rid of it, but again, I always suggest doing the manual cuts and edits, because you may end up losing information, important information from the gate. But it's also a really useful tool, especially if you have a consistent sound like a hum or a buzz you're trying to get rid of in general. All right, so this is kind of a more automated way of getting rid of sounds. But one thing to note is you're adding a plugin, so that is drawing from your overall processing power. And number two, you're still leaving these noises in here as opposed to just cutting them out and not having as much data sitting in your track. All right, so that's one thing to consider. Alrighty, so the last thing I really wanted to mention before wrapping up this video is if you have multiple takes of a part, which isn't, necessarily what's going on here, we can use our playlists in Pro Tools to navigate and put together different parts and takes to create one compiled and ideal track. Right? So let's take the bass clarinet here. And I don't have multiple takes of this, but let's say I'm not sure whether or not I want to use this part. If I want to take it out for now and still keep it in case I want to use it later, I can go down over here to where it says waveform, click on that, hit playlist, and it opens up a playlist lane. Now, what's great about this is I can highlight this audio, all right, hit Command E to separate it from the rest of the audio. And if I'm saying I don't know if I want to use this, or I want this bass clarinet player to come in and record over this because maybe it's not perfect, I can now click and drag this down into my playlist lane. And if I was doing multiple takes of the same recording, I can have as many playlist lanes as I want. And what's great is I could listen to the best version or try and identify the best version of the solo, of the take. And then if I like it, I just hit this little up arrow and look, it puts this part right in there. So that's how people create comped takes, is they use the playlist, they put all the takes in the playlist lane like down here, and then they listen to the different parts and they move them up and down based on how they think it fits overall. So that's the basics of comping and playlisting. I have another video up in our lessons module that goes in depth with comping and playlisting. All right, so that's it for this video. We'll have one more, and of course, let me know if you have any additional questions. All right, thanks guys.